The Rambam writes, "Shteik tzavos harchokus umuzu." The two ends, the two extremes, two opposite ends of the spectrum. We're talking about tendency-wise, shcholdeo b'deo, in regard to every attribute, characteristic, every inclination. Einun derech tova. The extreme in either direction is not something good. A person is extremely giving, overly giving. A person is overly miserly. It's not good. Even something you would believe would be something positive, but to the extreme of whatever it may be, any extreme is something not good. A person should not follow that path. The extremes of each one of these predilections, tendencies, and one should not, he had said, there's certain behavior patterns which are learned through a person conditioning himself. You could assume that behavior pattern. If a person sees his nature is going in that direction, he's becoming too extreme, or he has a certain susceptibility that ultimately he may go in that direction, or he already assumed one of those behavior patterns, and he already conducts himself at that extreme level. He has to extricate himself to a better position, and you should go in the path of those who conduct themselves in a good manner. And what is a good manner? What is that point? You walk the straight path. You know, there's an expression in English, straight and narrow path. You walk that straight and narrow path, that's the good path. If you feel you're going to either extreme or headed in that extreme, you have to do whatever you can to pull back and try to get back to that straight and narrow path, which he's explaining more. What's that straight and narrow path? So either you're there, you have the tendency to go there, whether it's natural or it's something you assumed and you're going there, it's not the right place to be. The right place to be is derech hayeshara, the appropriate path, the straight path. What's the straight path? So the next statement in the Rambam, in my manners, will tell you what that straight path is, what the derech hayeshara is, the straight and narrow path. We mentioned yesterday that a human being is endowed with intelligence. And what does intelligence allow a person to do? To make an assessment and evaluation. And based on that evaluation, we make a decision how to conduct ourselves. What about if the analysis or that evaluation is flawed? So you may have done your due diligence, but since the due diligence was flawed, it's not appropriate due diligence. So the end result of how you should conduct yourself is not really appropriate. So we gave the example, which Rambam will soon discuss. A person's overly generous. Overly generous. Somebody comes to that person and asks for assistance, whether it's on an individual level, institutional level, whatever level it may be. Because the person naturally is so overwhelmingly giving, the person is actually accommodated at a level that his request or his need is not worthy of such a level of accommodation. But it's only because this person is overly generous, he's actually overfunded what has to be funded for less. Because that request doesn't deserve that level of funding. So why did the person do more than he should have done? Because his evaluation of the need of whatever that may be is flawed, because he has a conflict. When it comes to giving, he has this vulnerability to give on an unlimited level. That's only because he's to the extreme of giving. but giving is a good thing. But it's not a good thing if you do more than you have to do. Over here we're speaking about there's a midah. What does a midah mean? Midah means a measurement. We speak about weights and measures. Weights and measures have to be accurate. If they're not accurate, the end result is flawed. It's not accurate weight. We have various predilections, we have tendencies, we have characteristics. If they're not balanced, the end result is what is flawed. Because you're leaning more to one side than the other side. I lean to give. But even though you lean to give, but factually, either the cause doesn't deserve support, or it deserves support, but not this kind of support. But let's say a person is more leaning to the left. He's not as giving. He's in that negative extreme. This cause is worthy of some level of support. To what level? Whatever it may be. But you're endowed with intelligence to make that evaluation. But because over here, you're giving, the ability to give is constricted, automatically, when the person makes his pitch to be helped, immediately it falls on deaf ears. Because naturally, you don't want to give. So it goes in both extremes. You're too giving, you're conflicted, and because of that conflict, you give too much. Well, you shouldn't give anything. And even if you give something, it's a fraction of what you do give. And when the person's truly in need, and you don't have the attribute of giving, you may not give at all because of that predilection and tendency not to give, where you should give something, definitely more than nothing. I just want to make a differentiation and explain it with a story. Rambam says, if you have a tendency to do good on an extreme level, naturally, anything, any characteristic which you possess, if it's to an extreme, it's not good. You have to choose, he says, the derech hayishara, which is the equidistant point from both extremes. And when you, at that point, now being balanced, your intellect, your evaluation system is not flawed because you have no conflict, not to the right, not to the left. So you're evaluating whatever has to be evaluated appropriately, correctly. That's what the Rambam is going to say in one moment. That's called derech hayishara. Derech hayishara means the straight and narrow path. When you play baseball, Larry, I'm not sure if that was your thing. I know you played stickball. I'm not sure about baseball. When you play baseball and you hit the ball, so if a person is a good hitter, you could hit that ball wherever you want it to go. But if a person, when he swings that bat, if he pulls either to right or left, that ball's could go off, could become a foul ball. You're not hitting it straight. Just the way you swing that bat and you connect with that ball, but if you pull your hand in or out, that it's not making direct contact to go where you want it to go. So when it's a direct hit and it's hit in a manner, it goes in that beeline, the way you hit it. But if your hand falls short of it or extends it, it doesn't go where you want it to go. Same idea. You're balanced. I make an evaluation. I make an analysis. I'll give you an example. Person's an analyst, right? Steve's an analyst. And your responsibility is to do research on certain companies. And you have the education, you have the background, you have the experience, you do analysis. you have no bias for or not, there you can do the analysis based on your ability. And it's going to be, hopefully, an appropriate analysis if you take everything into consideration. But let's say the company you're doing the analysis, it's somebody really you wish he would fail. And you don't want your person, who you're representing, to invest money in that company. You're going to find every flaw, every problem, because you really don't want your employer to invest in that company. So the analysis you're going to do, because of your dislike for that company, whoever owns that company, or the product they manufacture, you wish that that company would go out of business because what they're trying to put out there. Therefore, you're not going to give an accurate analysis, even though you think you are. But because you have a conflict of interest, negative or positive, the analysis is not going to be appropriate. That's the same thing with us. Any decision we make in life, how to behave, how to invest time, how to invest money, how to invest our lives, all that's based upon analysis. And if you are biased in either direction, positive or negative, that's going to cause the analysis not to be accurate. And your ability, your intellect, is not really evaluating it objectively because already is a bias, either to give or not to give. We're all human. We all have conflicts. We read a Pirkei Avos. Larry's an expert at Pirkei Avos. Kol hamazakes harabim. A person brings merit to the community. Ein chet ba'al yodo. He will merit divine protection, that sin will not come through him. He will not be the cause of somebody to sin. Meaning that person merits a certain divine clarity that his decision will be a right decision. He's not going to mislead anybody that he should be the cause of other people to sin. Because he brings merit to the community. People of a certain stature, spiritual stature, they merit certain divine clarity. As I say, we speak of objectivity. Nobody's fully objective, because every one of us is a product of our lifelong experiences, our education, our social circle, our financial circle. Everybody has some influence in our lives. So whatever we do, whatever we think, our perspective is always impacted by all that. You can say a person, despite that, is most objective, but totally objective. We're all influenced by something. But the person who's at that special level regarding spirituality, he merits what we call siyata d'shmaya. He has that special divine assistance that he sees it in a way, despite that, he sees it correctly. God gives him that ability to see. You know, you have an electric microscope. It can magnify something endlessly larger than it is. But if you don't have that electric microscope that magnifies it, you're limited to your own ability, which is very limited. And if you have no microscope, you just have your eyeglasses, corrective lenses, you're limited to a greater degree. We all have limitations. So how does one go beyond his limitations? You need endowment. But let's say you're not worthy to have an endowment. But there are people out there who do. You know what you have to do? If you have an important decision to make in life, you have to consult with one of these people. There are those people out there that, because they're so spiritualized and they live a life committed to God at that special level, they merit that divine clarity, and you should consult with them. We call this in Hebrew das Torah. That's Torah perspective. These people have Torah perspective because of who they are. And that's what it says, really, Pirkei Avos. Aseh l'cha Rav k'rei l'cha chover. Even though the Rav we're talking about, the teacher, is not necessarily a teacher at that very special level, but there are teachers. Doesn't mean he's your personal teacher. But you consult with people, and these people are always right. Many cases, you send the person to consult with someone, and he says, he's wrong. He gave me bad advice. Fast forward 5 years down the road, person says, you know something? I was too hasty to pass judgment. He was exactly right. Exactly right. For whatever reason. He didn't even know why he was so right. Because of who he was. He had a level of clarity, which you don't. He sees beyond the trees. He sees beyond because of who he is. There's a famous word from the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon, which when a person is observant, he studies. A person who's truly that Torah giant, he merits this divine assistance to have what we call das Torah. He has the perspective of a Torah mind. What about if you're not at that level? So he says that if a person sits down and studies 6 hours, immersed in Torah study, uninterruptedly for 6 hours, after you finish that study session, when you approach the problem, the way you're going to process that will be with das Torah. The person will merit that divine assistance. This is what the Vilna Gaon writes. So everybody, if you're not a flawed person, you have relevance to that level of clarity if you follow this procedure. There's a verse in Koheles, which King Solomon writes that when Hashem created Adam, he created him Yashar. But what happened? Meaning he was a straight thinker. He had nothing denying him that clarity to understand exactly how he has to live his life. He had no conflicts. However, he outsmarted himself. Bikesh cheshbonus rabos. He sought out all kinds of computations. He's going to do it better. And because of that, he got himself really, as they say, that messed up. He messed himself up, and he lost that ability of what? Of Yosher, that straight perspective. Because he allowed himself to partake of the tree of knowledge, which is evil. Now he has an addiction. He has an addiction to evil. So he lost that ability of what? Of Yosher, of the straight and narrow path. The Jewish people at Sinai, we assume that characteristic of Yosher, of Odom, because we have the characteristic of Yosher. What is Yosher? The Midrash tells us, and this is really in the portion of the end of the book of Vayikra, where we speak about the Tochacha. God forbid if there's tremendous suffering brought about upon humanity. The Midrash says that any nation that God began punishing, that nation no longer exists. Why? Because the moment God begins punishing them, they become angry and upset, and they rebel against God. And the more they rebel, the more God punishes them, until finally God destroys them. That's why any nation, any civilization that God began punishing, that civilization doesn't exist any longer. But the Jewish people, on the other hand, when God begins punishing them, The Midrash tells us, nichnoim, they become subdued. They become humbled. And when they become humbled, they realize that the shortcoming is themselves, it's not in God. And we deserve to receive what God gives us. We have that capacity. Then nichnoim, nichnon ve'osin tshuva. They become subdued and they do tshuva. Then when do you do tshuva? When you recognize you did the wrong thing. How many people could admit they did the wrong thing? If you're arrogant, one doesn't admit he did the wrong thing. But if you have that innate humility, sometimes we forget about who we're supposed to be. Sometimes you need a good twang to wake you up, to understand it's not what you think. And that's when we do tshuva. I once heard a phenomenal allegory. The Rambam says it elsewhere. The Rambam writes in the laws of divorce, if a husband divorces a wife and it's not done consensual, the divorce is not a valid divorce. The husband, if the husband's forced to divorce his wife, somebody goes up to a man and says, your wife can't remarry unless you give her the writ of divorce, to terminate the relationship. He says, I'm not over my dead body. That's what he tells the person. Person says, it's your choice. Takes out a gun. He says, look, either you write the document and give it to her in presence of witnesses, or I pull the trigger. It may be over your dead body. And he gives the get. He gives the divorce. It's not valid. It's not valid. Why? Because that's under coercion. It's not called consensual. What about if the rabbinic court rules that he has to give a get? The rabbinic court, that decision is based on what the Torah says, what God wants, and the man is not willing to listen. The court has the right to take the man and restrain him and even cause him tremendous pain, that he should agree to give it to her. And the reason why he's giving it, because he can't tolerate the pain anymore. So the Rambam asks, why is that get under coercion? Like the other case I just mentioned. So he explains to you, because when the court rules, based on the Torah decision, he must divorce his wife, this is what God wants. Every Jew deep down wants to do what God wants. So what does he have to be forced to give the get? What does the Bezdin have to give him, the lashes or break his bones to give the get? So he explains, the Rambam, because a person has an evil inclination, and the evil inclination causes him to be arrogant and thinks that he runs the show, that he dictates his life. When he experiences that pain, he realizes it's not him, it's God that runs the show. So in essence, when he gives the get, he's really doing what God wants. And the will of every Jew is to do what God wants. Therefore, that's called the consensual get. When the third party pulls out a gun and says, give the get, which that person is imposing on himself and coercing to give the get, doesn't mean to say God wants it. If that's the case, that's not called consensual. But when the Bezdin or the rabbinic court rules that he should give the get, that means God wants you to give it. So, but you mean you don't want to do what God does? Okay, something. We'll knock some sense into your head. The sense is you can't tolerate the pain. And now, when you do, you're doing what God wants. That's the Rambam. So years ago, we'd have to stop right after this. There was this person, he used to visit Yad Avram from Geneva. His name was Bruce Rappaport. It was a phenomenal storyteller. He told a story, and I've told this in the past. This person had almost like a miracle donkey. This donkey, all you had to say to it, please, and it would follow your orders. It would follow your direction. Please, donkey, do this. Please, donkey. So there was this farmer who heard about this miracle donkey. He got all excited. He called the one who owned the donkey. He says, I'm willing to pay anything for that donkey. Of course, I have a lot of chores at my farm, and I have to struggle with my donkeys. This donkey, if all you have to say is please, that's the donkey for me. So he goes, picks up the donkey with his pickup truck, brings it to his farm, and he pays a hefty sum of money for the donkey. And then afterwards, he loads up the donkey, He says, please, donkey, walk. Donkey doesn't move, doesn't budge. He begins pulling the donkey, begging the donkey. Donkey doesn't move. So he calls up the person who sold the donkey. He says, I think you misled me. You duped me. You took me for a ride. You took my money. I want my money back. He says, what's the problem? He says, you told me all you have to do is say, please, and donkey follows your order. Here, I've been screaming, please, please, begging. The donkey doesn't move. He says, impossible. He says, I'm coming over to your farm. I want to see what the problem is. Donkey's loaded up. The purchaser says, please, donkey. Donkey doesn't move. So the seller says, I forgot to tell you one thing. Before you say please, he picked up a block of wood off the ground, slams the donkey in its temple, that the donkey's head nearly ricochets back and forth. Then he says, please, donkey. Now the donkey walks. Very nice. Now the donkey understands who's the master is. That's the way it works. You know something? A human being thinks he's in control. We have an evil inclination. We have an ego. It's me, I. That's what it's all about. God says, something? That's not what it's about. Sometimes I have to turn the screws on you. And when you start screaming, uncle, then you realize who's in control. And the only way to alleviate that pain is only God himself. Now you understand who's in control. So when the court rules that you must give that get, which is based upon God's decision, now you're doing, and you can't tolerate the pain, now you're doing exactly what God wants. And therefore, that divorce is considered consensual, not under coercion. I'm going to stop here because I have an